what I want to talk about briefly is some of the things that we've done in the city of Middleton, and appreciate the opportunity for us all to share together. Madison, Middleton, Fitchburg, Sun Prairie, we've all been learning from each other. So by no means do we think we have it put together. And then I'll just start with a disclaimer that I've worked for lots of organizations, as you can see, and none of them should be held liable for anything I'm going to say. So these are my own views. Let's see. Next slide. There we go. So what I want to do just briefly is help us all to understand our market. These are issues that Middleton, Sun Prairie, Fitchburg, Monona, the cities outside of Madison all face. Then I'll talk about some of the strategies that we've used, including our workforce housing committee, down payment assistance program, some of our strategies for new neighborhoods, TIF plus LIHTC. If you wanted the bumper sticker version of our strategy, it's that, TIF plus LIHTC. And then I'll talk about our workforce housing strategy, next steps, updates, and I'll mostly focus in on some projects and examples because it's easier to see. So in terms of understanding our market, this is true of Middleton. It's also true of Fitchburg. We are in a very strong demand county. And that's one of the reasons why our housing prices are so high, no matter what we do. We have good job growth, income growth, lots of people moving here, lots of people starting families. And the data will be on the next couple slides. We have a real shortage of supply. Our vacancy rates are really low. And one of the things that means is if you don't build enough housing to keep up with demand in a region, prices go up. And prices go up faster for the housing stock that's on the lower end of the price scale, and therefore the more affordable housing. So prices are going up, affordability is going down. We'll also look a little bit at commuting and labor force patterns. So for those of us in Middleton, when we think about how we understand our market, we have, unlike Fitchburg, we have limited areas for new residential development because we have strong intergovernmental agreements with the town of Springfield and the town of Middleton to try to have a compact urban form. So if you ever look on one of our maps, we really only have a few hundred acres left, and that's already platted in one large development called Bishop's Bay. We have a strong employment base. We've had successful economic development and TIF, so we've grown from a bedroom community to about 18,000 jobs in about 20 years. We have a huge demand for our housing because we have a decent place to live, good parks, good schools, as does Fitchburg, of course. We suffer with the fact that we have the highest median value of homes for all Dane County cities. Some of the towns have a higher price point, but in terms of cities, we have the highest median value of housing, and we have the third highest median gross rent for a 2-bedroom rental. We also have one of the lowest vacancy rates. So we keep, as I'll show you, we keep building more units, and we still have a vacancy rate that's less than 1%. So most economists will tell you a 5% vacancy rate is a good target for a rental market to balance supply and demand. And there at the bottom, you see that for me, one of the big kind of theoretical points that we argue about is whether we are a suburb or a city. And in many ways, we were developed as a suburb 20, 30 years ago, but we have become a city, but we're still in growing pains. So cities have density and transit and lots of jobs, and we have lots of jobs and some density and some transit. So again, to put it in context, because Fitchburg and Middleton in and of themselves can't control the market, the Dane County market is driven by steady population growth, steady household formation, and lots of jobs. So you can see that population has gone up about 1.3% a year. If you look at the far right of the table, household formation has gone up about 1.4% a year. That tells us that households are getting smaller. But housing units have only gone up 1.1% a year. So every year we're adding more people, we're adding more households, but we're not adding enough units to keep up with it. And again, that puts pressure on prices, particularly on the low end. Dane County is a jobs machine, the best in the state. We had about 1.7% of new jobs per year. So if you want to think in terms of simple supply and demand, jobs plus people plus income is household demand. And we're not keeping up with it. And so the other table, the bottom part of the table shows you rent is going up faster than household income. But the other strange thing about Madison relative to other markets is that our renter household income is going up a lot faster than owner household income. And what that really means is that we have a large number of professionals or retirees who have moved into the rental market, helping to drive up demand and prices. So when we think about the demand for jobs and the demand for future housing, which is part of what a housing committee is looking at, we have to remind ourselves the fact that Dane County is a desirable place from a jobs perspective, but there's over 100,000 workers who live outside of the county who commute into the county to work. Mm-hmm. Now, if we were able to build enough housing to accommodate some percentage of those workers would actually move into the county. And that's important about thinking about future housing supply to meet demand. So what I did is for our city of Middleton, we have become more of a job center. Right off the highway is a good location for us. We have about 18,000 jobs, population of 20,000, so almost one job for every person. But most of the people, 17,000, live outside of our city and commute in for work. And of course, about 8,000 commute out of Middleton to work, mostly people like me who go downtown, Madison. So for Fitchburg, here's that same data source. You have about 10,000 workers, 9,200, right, who live outside of Fitchburg and commute into Fitchburg to work. But you have over 12,000 of your workers who live here and commute outside. So your housing situation might be a slightly different market segment than in Middleton. In Middleton, we're really looking at trying to capture the people who work here but can't afford to live in our city to be able to live in our city. Whereas this data suggests that you're still functioning at least sort of more like a bedroom community. So again, when you think about the balance, if you want people to drive less, you either have to build more housing near jobs or bring jobs closer to where the people are living. So within the central area of the Madison area, so that's Madison, Middleton, Fitchburg, and Monona zip codes, right? In some ways, we are all part of the same housing market. And if you look at the blue scale, you'll see that we have built thousands and thousands and thousands of rental units over the last 16 years, but that our vacancy rates have barely budged above 3% in the last 6 or 7 years. In many ways, this is the twofold factor, right? Construction costs are going up, so it's harder to build, and there's just an increased demand for rental housing. So one of the things I've also done is a statewide housing report, and just to put it in context, in Dane County, if you look at our numbers, we underproduce about 1,000 housing units a year. So that's something that all of us as cities have to think about. We're adding thousands of units, right? It seems like everywhere you go, people are building, you see the construction cranes, and we've added more housing units in Dane County than anywhere in the rest of the state. We've also added more people, but it's still not enough. We underproduce about 1,000 housing units per year. So that's always sometimes a challenging story to tell ourselves because as you all know, if you're an elected official or an appointed official, people think that there's already too much housing development. So when you tell them that it's still not enough, they're not super enthused about that. So one of the ways to think about affordability or prices is if you look at the blue line, economists will tell you that a price to income ratio for housing of about 3, this is for purchase of homes, is about what we would consider affordable. Up until about 2000 and the year 2000, Madison area was affordable, but since the year 2000, that price ratio has gone up to 3.6. So this, one of the reasons we have strong rental demand is it's very hard for younger families, moderate income families to be able to purchase a home in the Dane County market. This is also true in other parts of the state of Wisconsin. And this is one of the things that leads to us having one of the worst black-white home ownership gaps anywhere in the country, both in Dane County and Wisconsin, is because the price point of an entry-level home is so high. So as long as we're thinking about our market and the future, and this is the context in which cities like Fitchburg or my city like Middleton will do forecasts and plans, these are staggering numbers. And what this says is that in the next 20 years, in Dane County, we have to produce somewhere between 54,000 and 59,000 housing units. So I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. And that doesn't include the 11,000 we underproduced in the last 11 years. So what this means is if you think about the county as a whole, think about our best year of 2013 or 2014, when everything was going gangbusters, people were building, credit was kind of cheap, the economy was humming. Take that, our best year, turn it up a notch, and do that every year for the next 20 years. So again, why do we talk about this? When we talk about a city thinking about its housing affordability challenges, we know that if we don't meet the market demand that's out there, price goes up and affordability goes down. So I know that Olivia's on here, and one of the things that we talk about at the county is having a county-wide housing strategy. Because as a county, we need to figure out where are we going to put 56,000 housing units in the next 20 years, right? If all of those housing units occur as kind of large lot, single family homes, there won't be much farmland left outside of the urban area, and traffic will be a nightmare, or more of a nightmare. So one of the things we use in Middleton is from the Dane County Housing Needs Assessment, which is just two different methods for determining what is the housing gap you might have in your community. We can talk more about this. We've done this in Middleton. So for us, we figure that our gap is somewhere between 420 units. And then the second method is, if you see that we have a number 435. So we used this analysis, sorry to jump back and forth. We used this analysis 5 years ago in our strategy to make a specific plan of needing to produce 250 affordable units, because our number from the previous report was 250. Now it's about 420. So if Fitchburg were to use these as a kind of target number, you can see that your number runs somewhere between 1,000 and I missed on the screen, and about 915. Yeah. So that's the number of, if you wanted to set a target that was based on the same numbers we set our target at, your numbers now would be about 900 to 1,000 affordable units. So you wanted me to talk more about our city strategy. So we had a strategy paper we wrote in 2015, which was adopted by City Council. And there's some of the language of it. But our goals are really, we're a job center. We want compact development, and we want a fixed income and diverse community. And it's also our way of thinking about the state statutes that require you to provide an adequate housing supply. So I'm moving kind of quickly through our strategy so we can get on to some of the projects we've worked on. We had about 14 strategy recommendations, and one of our tasks this summer is to update this report. So we encourage loans and down payment assistance programs. And we used to have one funded by our Community Development Authority, but there's currently no funding available for down payment assistance. But our main strategy has been to leverage our 2 tax increment districts with the WHEDA scoring criteria for the low-income housing tax credit. So if you see the map on the right, those red areas are census tracts that score particularly high on WHEDA's scoring criteria. And so we looked at those and aligned our TIF districts with those. And we basically said to developers, if you want to do a high density, affordable multifamily project in those areas, the city is going to agree to support you with TIF and with some zoning and other sort of city assistance. So that's one of our main strategies that seem to have worked over the last 5 years. But as some of you may know, WHEDA is changing its scoring criteria again for this most recent round and they haven't come out with the specific criteria yet. So we're looking forward to updating our strategy when those numbers come out. So here's an example of how we worked together to leverage the WIDA tax credit program with our strategy. So we had a goal, we had a priority area, and then a developer, Jacob Klein, came forward, and I'll show you some pictures later of the redevelopment. It was in one of our kind of transition areas where we have lots of jobs planned and we have good bus service. And he has a nice income mix there at different ladders of the income scale, including some market rate. And there you can see that the total project was about 16.3 million. And he was able to win the tax credit award for the high impact project reserve from WIDA. I see Mr. Schimming in the picture, and he was at WIDA at the time. And then the city combined with the county money and other sources to put in some TIF. So if you want, this is just for your information. This is the costs for that project. And again, it worked out at the time to about 171,000 per unit. Today, we are finding that with construction costs and other costs that tax credit developments or any multifamily in our city is about $190,000 to $200,000 per unit. And so as cost goes up, rent goes up. And there you can see that the city TIF was about 22,000 per unit. So if Fitchburg's looking for a rough and dirty number of how much TIF assistance is really needed per unit in a tax credit deal, if you look at us and what Madison does, it's somewhere between 20 and 30,000 a unit. And there you can see the before picture. It was a kind of a rundown strip mall bowling alley that was vacant. And this is why I talk about, are we a suburb with a kind of strip development, or are we a city where the new development comes close to the street? You can see a high level of finish in the units. So a couple of more things we've done in our strategy is we've really focused on not only redevelopment in the large scale like Meadow Ridge, but trying to think about this incremental density in existing neighborhoods with the concept of the missing middle. And I know that you in Fitchburg have a form-based zoning code, so this is nothing new for you. So one of the things we took inspiration from was small lot subdivision in Femright Drive in Monona. And your current planner, Sonia, was in Monona, I think, during this time. And there you see that you had a large parcel with one older house that was really able, through good site design, to produce 6 smaller units in the neighborhood. And when people object to this sort of density, you can tell them that these houses recently sold for about $400,000 each.
Wow.
So we have the same thing that we tried in Middleton. We had a 1-acre parcel, an older house, and working with a developer, he platted 6 separate lots. These are all single-family construction. So he has one under construction right now. It's a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and at $410,000. So one of the reasons I emphasize the price point is to also say how difficult it is, just through design, to bring down the cost of new single-family construction. And I'll show you some of those later. One of our strategies, and there's a lot of information, so I'm just gonna go quickly and you can look at this later, is in any of our neighborhoods that we plat, we want a range of lot sizes and a range of housing choices. So this is one of our newer subdivisions. There are some 3,000 square foot lots, and I'll show you pictures. And then there's some larger estate lots in the back. But there's also multifamily mixed right into the neighborhood. So one of the things we do in this, to get density and to get a kind of more urban street pattern, is we allow developers on some of the streets to do an alley loaded product, which really reduces for a developer your infrastructure costs and also allows you to have kind of smaller houses on smaller lots. So I just picked one out from random on Zillow because I drive by this all the time on my way to drop off at soccer practice. And here you have a really small lot, but the house was recently sold for $422,000. So we use small lots and alley-loaded products to meet some of our large demand for single family, but even the smaller houses on smaller lots aren't necessarily affordable for working class folks. Here's another subdivision we did a few years ago. And there again, you can see kind of a smaller house on a smaller lot with a narrower street frontage that helps to reduce the developer's costs. And here we have a kind of slightly older product that can be purchased for $316. So if we want to create that kind of entry-level housing product, we need to all, as a county, get more creative in terms of smaller houses on smaller lots. That's been one of our strategies. So we're also interested in thinking about even going smaller with what are called cottage clusters. And here you see some architects rendering. And we don't have one in Middleton, but just over the border in Madison, the cottages at Chapel View, if you see on the north part there near Old Sauk Road, they have a number of these really small cottages. And I heard from the developer that they're selling like hotcakes because it's really hard to make a housing product with your traditional wide street frontage and driveway in the front and your traditional suburban product. We're also interested in trying to use these small multifamily housing as a way to kind of do small scale infill within a neighborhood. So here's a project that was fun to work on when I was on the Plan Commission. The picture on the left is an old Quonset hut looking building that was really run down, an eyesore. And working with the developer, they built a 16-unit multiplex that we used some TIF assistance for an affordable project within that development. And there you see that it's really added value to the neighborhood and it's within walking distance of our high school. So there are ways to do kind of high quality infill and redevelopment that's not at the scale of a large apartment building that works in some of our older neighborhoods. One other project we've worked on that you may have heard about was called Stagecoach. The picture on the left is the street view of 3 or 4 of the most god-awful, ugly old houses that were run down and were really an eyesore as an entry point to our community. And then the picture on the right is that was redeveloped into a 48-unit market plus affordable development. So I'll get, as I'm getting towards the end, like Fitchburg, we had an Act 243 housing affordability report we had to work on. So one of the things we put in there, just as a kind of a illustration of how your zoning and land use regulations really affect the price and scope of housing within your community, is what I did is I modeled here is if we were to cut our lot sizes in half to some of these smaller kind of houses that we've already built, and then assuming that a developer will build a smaller unit on a smaller property, even at a higher land cost per square foot and a square foot construction cost, because there are economies of scale, you can see that we were able to, just in this kind of simulation, reduce the cost of a new unit from about $425,000 to about $372,000. Now, I'm very much aware of the fact that our mayor and your mayor are interested in creating new opportunities for affordable home ownership. And $372,000 is still not what we would consider affordable. So part of our strategy going forward is allow the market to build large numbers of these kind of smaller houses on smaller lots that will kind of alleviate some of the pressure in that middle band of our housing market. And then what we want to work on in the coming years is then having a down payment assistance program and a rehab program so that as a kind of entry-level housing, a lot of the older homes that were built in the 40s and 50s that need some improvement would be that kind of product that we would think of as the entry-level housing product. And again, we've looked at Monona's Renew Monona Loan Program as a model of how we could do kind of an affordable rehab product and help working class people purchase an older home. So that's the end of my presentation. That's a lot of information. But we've got a lot of things going on, and in some ways we have similar challenges to Fitchburg. So thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
That was very awesome. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
That was a lot of information, but that was great. Do we want to have questions? If you do, just raise your hand and I can call on you. Godwin?
And I will email this out to all of you.
Actually, I think it was emailed earlier because I looked at it earlier from Joyce, so it was good to read it. Kurt, thanks so much for a great presentation. I lived in Middleton many years ago. In fact, I was a very good friend of your former mayor, Dan Ramsey, when we created the World Trade Center. And one of the things that somehow has always been in the back of my mind is that I thought of all the communities around here, Middleton has been the one that was always good in having far-fetched ideas. I mean, the concept of a World Trade Center for a West Side location was really intriguing. And obviously, in my banking days, George Lamas loved Middleton, and we've seen what your business park has really resulted into. A couple of things have come. I mean, like I said, I read the presentation before. A couple of things that were in my mind, which I need your help in explaining to me, is you use the word workforce housing strategy. I want to make sure that I know what that means specifically, because obviously one of the problems we have is that houses in Fitchburg are relatively more expensive. If we were to take a strategy of encouraging people in Fitchburg and be able to work in Madison, Verona, or the neighboring community. I mean, we like to have people live in our community. It's a great community. What do we need to do to make sure that if we adopted a similar strategy, the cost of housing is reduced substantially? The other thing I had, again, this is the advantage, I haven't read it before your presentation. The other thing the other thing I noticed is that you raised the issue of Middleton having a constraint on land. That's one of the things we don't have so far in Fitchburg. Maybe you can comment on how we'll be able to use more of our available land to really do the kind of targeting we want to do. And my last issue here really is more of a policy question in our area. I'm aware of some developers that have attempted to come into Fitchburg, and they have confided in me that there have been constraints created through our Common Council and citizen advocacy. How have you guys handled things like those in Middleton? Thank you very much.
Those are great questions, and I'll take them in reverse order so that I remember it. We've had our own share of contentious city meetings about any redevelopment projects. And I want to make a distinction between what I consider redevelopment, and all of the projects I showed you and some I didn't are along major arterial roads, or the Meadow Ridge and the Oak Ridge, the tax credit developments. We're in an area of the city where there's no residents right now. So we sometimes joke that the easiest redevelopment is one that doesn't have any neighbors. And that was part of a neighborhood plan because it was an older industrial area and the state highway was relocated. And so we had all this older rundown land. And so the neighborhood plan, which didn't have a lot of human neighbors to object, wanted this balanced land use that included employment activities plus lots of housing along that corridor. But we've also seen cases where when we try small scale redevelopment, even a small 3 or 4 story or an 8-plex in the interior of an existing neighborhood, we get the same level of opposition. We've not been all that successful at getting those done. So that one I showed you at the corner, the 16 unit, that's along a commercial strip, so there were no neighbors to object. But the last one I showed you, the Stagecoach, that was, you can read about it. It was quite contentious. And I think one of the ways we've been successful is that we have a workforce housing committee, which the developers will meet with ahead of time. And then that committee really becomes an advocate within the city. We've had tremendous support from our city staff, Mike Davis and Abby Atun in particular. And then I think over the years, we have built those relationships with city council in terms of their support for workforce housing. So I can't say there's one strategy that makes it easy, but it is this continuous education and outreach to the community. And I only showed you the successful projects, but there have been some that were that we didn't get approved.
Okay.
And I think the way to think about it is, if as a county, we need to add about 58,000 housing units, if every single neighborhood that's already single family just says we're completely full, you can't have another single unit of housing in our community, then the question becomes, where do we put all these units, right? Certainly along arterials where you might have bus access or employment access, that's where the higher density multifamily redevelopment seems to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of missing middle incremental infill in existing neighborhoods, I don't think anyone's figured out how to overcome that opposition yet. So the second question in terms of land constraint, well, I guess I'd have to look at your comprehensive plan, because if you think about forecasting how many units you need, then at various density assumptions, you can either accommodate that in like 200 acres of developable land or 400 acres.
Okay.
Right, so that really becomes a comprehensive plan question.
Mm-hmm.
And what your comprehensive plan is supposed to do is forecast how much housing unit demand you have, and then show in your plan how you're actually going to provide that. So for us, we have this large area called Bishop's Bay that's a couple hundred acres that is platted to have 600 to 800 new homes over the next 20 years. So that's almost all of our future housing demand is met in that one development. And I haven't looked at Fitchburg's comprehensive plan, so I don't know how far south you intend to go with development in a kind of a phased growth plan. The first question was about how to reduce the cost. And I think there's two ways to think about it. You can, through innovative land use regulations and zoning, significantly reduce the cost of development by smaller houses, smaller lots, reduce the parking requirements, speed up the process, make it by right rather than a conditional use or a rezoning. There's all sorts of creative ways to think about. If you make a narrower frontage requirement, then developers don't have to spend as much on infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And sidewalks and roads can be $1,000 a running foot. So that really adds up. You can reduce or eliminate impact fees. Sorry, Mike.
No,
I
go
know the
ahead.
city budget.
We've talked about that before. There's nothing to be sorry about.
But if you think about it, in the spreadsheet that I showed, for us, all the impact fees are only $6,000. That alone won't make a unit affordable. The other way to think about it is, no matter how much you try to bring down the cost through market developments, even with multifamily to reduce parking requirements and to allow higher density and smaller units, you're never going to build anything new that's affordable to anyone that we would consider at the workforce level, 80% of median income or below. And that's where, so to produce those subsidized units that are below market, that help our range of households who need an affordability product, that's where you really need to partner and leverage the county programs, the city programs, TIF, and the state housing tax credit, which I mean, when I look at WEDA's most recent tax credit awards, Fitchburg has been successful in getting a few of them in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've not been as successful in the last 2 years, probably because we were so successful early on that maybe internally someone said, hey, let somebody else have a chance. And I'm looking at Mr. Shimming who's laughing. So.
Well,
But the other way I think Fitchburg should consider is pair the 4% tax credit with the bond or a kind of acquisition and rehab product of a lot of your older multifamily.
Okay.
Because one of the ways we can make housing affordable is let it get so old that it deteriorates in quality that then the price is lower, right? It's called naturally occurring affordable housing, which obviously Madison has some, we have some, Fitchburg has some, but it's not the highest quality and it can produce negative health impacts for the people who live there. So part of your strategy might be looking at using a city money with the state tax credit or a rehab to preserve that housing as affordable over the long term. And I throw out a lot of terms, but I can show Joyce or Mike a lot of the math of how to do those 4% deals. But it does require some city subsidy to make it affordable.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your candor. That's very nice.
Kurt, this is Brian, and thank you for your time, by the way. I appreciate it because this is super helpful, and Middleton's done a great job out there with some different constraints than we have here, but many of the same ones as well. And I was thinking about Jacob Klein's projects, the ones you were referencing before, which, I mean, that was a bowling alley, and that's just a lot of open land out there that doesn't, if it were in town somewhere, it'd be blighted. I mean, if it were, so it's, I thought those were great projects and great partnership with the city of Middleton, big time. And I think we're coming from a perspective too that, to be candid, we handcuffed ourselves, or this is my opinion, but we handcuffed ourselves with our last comprehensive plan 10 years ago. And we need to, and a bad signal got sent out to developers and to not only on the residential side, but on the business side that Fitchburg, I don't want to say hostile, but I've tried, you know, a lot of people in this community or in the business community, and I do too. And so I think unintentionally the wrong signal went out, and hopefully we'll be able to start to get out from under that by some of the devices you talked about before. And Jacob Klein's project, I mean, those are nice projects. Those are really nice projects. And I tell people, you know, you go down and look at, even in Madison, you go down on East Washington Avenue and look at some of the biggest buildings down there in the old gasoline alley on East Washington Avenue, and there's LIHTC units on the back of those buildings, as you know. So there are creative ways to do different things.
And I would just say in response to that people's perception, and unfortunately the federal code, as you know, calls it the low-income housing tax credit.
Right.
But it doesn't really target the lowest of the low income. And that's why we always show people the quality of the units and the quality of the building. Because since a developer has a restriction for 30 years, they really know that they need to produce a high quality product so that in 30 years, when it goes to market, they're still going to have a decent quality unit to rent out. And so when people walk through those units and they see the quality, it kind of helps dispel some of the myth that, oh, this is really, you know, the public housing of the 1960s. It's not that at all. It's high quality property management, good tenant selection, and then a real range of incomes and family sizes within the unit. That's where we've really emphasized kind of that mixture of that kind of different bands of income along up and down the scale, including market rate.
The other thing I was going to add too is because I was traveling the state a lot when I was at WEDA and looking at housing in the smallest and largest cities, and a lot of the older housing stock, more so in, I don't know if I should, in smaller to medium-sized towns, people were staying there, folks, seniors were trying to stay in their houses, you know, which we, as a policy, we say we like, you know, where they can live independently anyway. But by the time we had people coming in with deals on those things, it would cost so much to go in there and fix that thing. And we probably have less older housing stock than a lot of our neighboring communities, just because of the nature of how Fitchburg came into being and those other factors. But boy, the cost of saving some of those really old buildings, and you have a lot in Middleton, you know, a lot, but I mean, downtown Middleton's beautiful. I mean, those streets down there are really, I mean, that's back when you had huge lots. I mean, I'm in Middleton a couple times a week, and but the cost of saving those things when they're so far along and have a lot of legacy issues and everything is really something.
Yep.
Dorothy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions on your project cost slide. I wanted to find out, how does the number of bedrooms factor into costs? Is there kind of a percent increase per bedroom that?
I think, well, for a developer, most of the cost is really in the building and the structural mechanics of the building. And there's not that much cost differential between per square foot between a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom. So once you think about kind of fixed building footprint size, which is often dictated by the site and by various fire codes and building codes as to how long the building can be and how many exits you need, then we usually are working with the developer to see if they are open to switching some of the 2-bedrooms into 1-bedrooms and switching some of the 2-bedrooms into 3-bedrooms. And at some level, reconfiguring the unit size once you have the structure of the building does not add that much or save that much in terms of the per unit cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, pretty much. I would like to encourage 4-bedroom also.
The difficulty is that in a lot of communities, if your parking ordinance requires is based on the number of bedrooms rather than just the number of units,
Right.
then if you're adding more bedrooms, you're adding more parking stalls, and every structured parking stall is about $20,000 of cost. So just to amortize that in the 20 years of the rent. So we've really reduced our parking requirements, especially if it's near a transit stop. And we pretty much adopted Madison standards, which is only require 1 stall per unit. Now, Godwin asked about community opposition, and we have to be honest that reducing the number of on-site parking spaces in an existing or near an existing area might produce some more community opposition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But parking really adds up the cost.
Yeah, we have a townhouse development that is they're not going to allow driveway parking, and they're going to have no alley parking and very limited street parking and a 1-car garage. And I'm like, that's not going to be enough. So, because it's not area that is likely to have transit anytime in the real near future. So people are car dependent. So there's not enough parking that's going to be there, and we're going to end up with issues. Other question that I had was, Fitchburg does have a lot of older places that are starting to age out that need, and we've got a lot of extremely low income people that need to not get kicked out of those places. They also are in areas that are opportunity zones. one of the fears that I have is that developers are going to come into opportunity zones and they're going to plan projects that are going to end up kicking out people that need that housing. And so one big question that I have as an alder in the city is, how do we help that not happen?
Right. In fact, there's a particular incentive within the tax code for the opportunity zones. Means that for a lot of that older housing, they wouldn't be able to put in enough capital to make that doubling of the investment test. And so one of the things we worry about across the county, not just in opportunity zones, is if we don't build enough units, then a lot of these naturally occurring affordable housing, these older buildings that you're talking about, you see a lot of price pressure on those as well. Mm-hmm. And especially if the result of COVID, if the mom and pop and out-of-state landlords who own some of these, if they're having difficulty with cash flow, then you're going to see investors buy those up, and they either raise the rents and don't reinvest in the units, or you also have the opposite problem, which is a well-meaning investor will buy them, invest in the property so that they increase in value, but then recapture that by increasing the rent. So either way, you get displacement. So we're particularly concerned about that in opportunity zones. So I would suggest that one of the strategies has to be preserving those houses and both reinvesting in those older rental units, but also maintaining the affordability. And there's only one way to really do that. Well, there's two ways. If you're sitting on a couple $100 million in personal wealth, you could do it. Or you would have to set up a fund pretty quickly with the city where you would leverage the WIDA 4% tax credit, the state housing tax credit, the WIDA bond program for a substantial rehabilitation under the low-income housing tax credit, because that would come with a 30-year affordability period. Yeah. Right? And it would come with all the federal renter protections for the existing tenants. But let's be honest, I think I know some of the properties you're talking about. $60,000 to $80,000 per unit in substantial rehabilitation costs, just to bring it up to kind of modern standards. And again, unless that is mostly subsidized with the federal tax credit program, with the city being the last dollar in, the only people who are going to put in $60,000 into a unit are developers who are going to want to recapture that with increased rent. And that's, I mean, I know we talked to Joyce and Mike about this years ago. You know, this is a problem that Madison faces, we face, Sun Prairie faces. We have all this older housing built in the 60s and 70s, this rental housing. Some of it, as Brian was saying, maybe actually is not worth saving because it's so far gone. But to build a new unit is $200,000 with or without subsidy. So if we're not willing to put up $50,000 to $80,000 per unit with some sort of rehab product, then we're basically saying as a county that a lot of those units will either completely disappear, because eventually they'll just be so worn down they have to be torn down. Or if you get enough price pressure, you'll get a market to gentrify and people get displaced as people buy them and then either reinvest or raise the rent. So you have every reason to be really worried about this, because there is no easy solution other than getting there ahead of developers.
I think I'm just going to jump in here. Common bond development out of the Twin Cities is particularly interested in this rehab market for multifamily. And they've reached out to me, and I've had a number of discussions with them about their interest in being notified if you have multifamily that's in need of rehab, because as soon as it goes out to the market, or as soon as it gets a broker or it gets identified by someone in the private sector, it's going to be they will outbid a nonprofit. But Commonwealth Development is a large I think it's one of the largest multifamily developers in the country.
Yeah.
Of affordable housing. And if you do have some properties that you're concerned that might happen with, I would seriously consider reaching out to Common Bond and talking and identifying and sharing with them some potential properties that you would be interested in having them take a look at, because they, they actually have the capacity to purchase and rehab these larger multifamily units. Yeah, and you can reach
And
out
there's a number of other investment funds around the country that have the same approach and are able to access large capital from Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. But yeah, you can't just sit around and wait until it happens, because as Olivia said, it'll probably be too late.
Yeah, you have to be really proactive. But if there's a short list of rehab properties that you have in Fitchburg, or that we have in Fitchburg, I would seriously consider, reaching out to these folks. Godwin?
Just out of curiosity, members of staff members here, are they aware of the entities you've talked about? Because one of the things I'm hoping we'll be able to achieve in our housing advisory committee is to be as proactive as possible. Whatever is happening anywhere that might be helpful to us, I'd like for us to be in the front end of that. So, when it's all done, it doesn't help us. I mean, for me, I want to see Fitchburg, take a lead in making sure that, listen, we know what's happening, we are conversant of what's happening, and then we'll make decisions based on good information.
Right. I mean, you could, go ahead.
In the meantime, we have authorized Dane County Housing Authority, okay? So hopefully they'll be able to jump into a lot of these projects as well and help out.
Just out of curiosity, Dorothy, did we approve, or did the council approve the recommendation that the city of Fitchburg establishes a relationship with Dane County Housing?
Yes, that was approved. And it was approved with the amendment that we wrote into it, saying that they will be sure and cover at least a portion of taxes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
If you're looking for a good report to kind of illustrate these issues, Dorothy, the Minneapolis area, it's called the NOAH, N-O-A-H, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing, NOAH Impact Fund, is a really good model of both kind of a research to show the need. I think we all know the need, but then it also shows the type of funding structure that they set up, which really brings together private banks, foundations, cities, counties, to really create a fund to go after preserving these sorts of properties.
I think most people in the city would be amazed at the number of units that we have on the north end that we're talking about. It's not a small number by any means. One thing that I think might be interesting when we can is to do a little bit of a group tour of some of the areas that we're talking about with the committee.
Just out of curiosity, with the eventual annexation of part of the town of Madison, some of the things we're talking about now might have impact in the town of Madison, where there's a good core of older houses, etc. I hope we're thinking about all of that, and if we want to encourage developers who want to be near the Madison border, this might be something that Fitchburg can, put out there that, listen, if you're looking for proximity, we're in a position to also give you proximity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we get as part of that, we get the Southdale neighborhood.
That is correct.
Which is a similar neighborhood to many of our older ones.
Mike or Joyce, is there anything, obviously we have, you have a great plan, you have a whole list of action items, and I think we're going to get to those in just a minute. Is there anything that would prohibit the city from considering, one of the this discussion that we're having about preserving, affordable housing, or I don't see that on the, in our first few years here of action items for the Fitchburg housing plan. So given it being such a, a real current issue, and it would, once you lose this housing, right, as we all know, it's much more expensive to get it back. Is there any way we can put forward something here, or that would actually address, considering or wanting to consider or looking into ways that, Fitchburg can preserve the existing housing or rehabilitate? Noah.
I think I'll take that, Olivia. We have a very good working relationship with our property maintenance person, or I'm not sure. I think he's a building inspector now, but we have a really good working relationship with him. He is in constant contact with us if there's any issues out there, and we have good relationships, I think, with a lot of the owners. Not always are we working with the property manager, but with the owner, and pretty much we can reach out if there's something that needs to be addressed, or if we have concerns, or we've even had them approach some of them and ask if they're interested in selling. So I feel confident that we're really staying on top of what's happening in the marketplace. Probably what some of the alders are hearing is more of, there's garbage laying around there, or things like that. And I guess one other thing with the Developers Bill of Rights that was passed, that kind of limits to what we can and can't do as far as property maintenance. So that, I think, in some respects, we've taken a little bit of a step back there as far as keeping things up, but that's just my opinion.
And I think we've done some of what Godwin had mentioned in his remarks there quietly prior to this Housing Advisory Committee. We worked with Royal Capital and WIDA on the redevelopment of the Maple Lawn Apartments there. And that was a complete renovation of those units. They're basically brand new units, and it included even going as far as putting in a fire safety sprinkler system to bringing it up to code. That was before the state preempted us from still requiring that as an option. But we had talked to those guys and said that if we were going to lend our name to kind of the WIDA housing tax credits, that was public safety priority for us. The other thing that we've done is we've tried to quietly, working with the building inspector that Joyce has referenced, he kind of shares information with us if he's talking to one of the property owners that might be interested in selling their properties. The ones that we didn't get to transition to somebody here locally, they were on the north side of Greenway Cross, and we had quietly reached out to, when we knew that they were potentially willing to sell those properties, we had reached out to the Madison Development Corporation and also the Dane County Housing Authority to see if they could acquire those units. And what we were hoping to have happen there was that would be a complete redevelopment of that property into new affordable housing units. Unfortunately, those units ended up going
In foreclosure.
for auction through foreclosure, and a gentleman from Florida acquired those, but I have to say, he brought in a local management and redevelopment company, and those units have been nicely redeveloped into some better quality units than what they were, including putting in washers and dryers. They didn't get a sprinkler system or anything, but they got new kitchens, new bathrooms, washers and dryers, stackables at least in the units. So that's a top priority for us really with our housing stock here, is how do we continue to get that older multifamily housing stock either completely redeveloped in some cases, so that way we have a better mix of unit type and unit size to the family needs out here. And if we can't get it completely redeveloped, at least get it renovated and rehabilitated so that it has upgraded units and more modern amenities in the units there. I think one of the challenges we have is we've got some complexes that are so large that how do we continue to work to reinvest in those units and those complexes? And then I think a question for our community is it, from a healthy neighborhood standpoint, in the best interest of our community to just renovate and reinvest in the existing stock there? Or do we try and mix up those neighborhoods from a housing unit and economic standpoint to create healthier neighborhoods long-term without driving out the existing residents that are living in those affordable housing units? In a lot of cases, those complexes have a lot of land for the buildings and number of units that they have. So you could see a scenario there where could you work with the property owner to start to construct some new units that the existing residents that are living in that older affordable housing that just kind of evolved over time, that they could move into those new units, and then we would demolish the older existing units and then maybe bring in an ownership product into the neighborhood. Maybe it's a multifamily, either garden-style condominiums or townhouse condominiums to, again, kind of create a better mix of housing stock for the neighborhood over the long term. So I think those are some things we'd really like to see this committee help us get our arms around and look to work with property owners. One question I have for Kurt is when it comes to the use of TIF here, our council has given us the parameters of they want to see us at 10% or less of the investment. So when I look at that Middleton project that you cited, I think it was 16 million. So in the parameters that our council gave us, they would like us to be at no more than 1.6 million. They want a 15-year payback, and then they want developer pay-as-you-go bond financing there. Does Middleton, does the council have parameters that they've given you for if there is TIF participation in a deal like that, that they've kind of given you to keep within?
Quit laughing.
So, well, so I'm going to be delicate here. Middleton was always known as being a little more aggressive in the use of TIF. And sometimes that meant for market rate deals that didn't really need TIF, but in terms of affordable housing for that gap finance, I would be hard pressed. So, and then we recently adopted a TIF policy in the city of Middleton. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it. That was my other handiwork because I helped write it. But one of the things I try to encourage in our policy is that if you're going to do a TIF for an affordable housing deal, you don't go with a strict economic development underwriting of this 10% cap, right? You look and you backward solve what the tax credit equity pricing is so that you figure out what's the gap you need to make a project work, that you design your incentives to align with WIDA's incentives. So we generally would, on a project like that, say that the total TIF participation should not exceed developers' equity.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
So that's a cap, but that would probably get us closer to 20% of a deal on some projects. So what's unique about the tax credit deals for a housing development is, right, there's an aggregate cap on the debt service coverage ratio. Okay, we're getting really geeky now, but right, and so that actually limits the amount of debt that you can get on a property for good reason, right? Because you're buying down that debt with the tax credit equity. So you know, if I had my own way, and council did not really, they accepted my language and it's in there as a generic, but we still have a lot of people, when they look at a TIF, they look at it as if it's more of like a shopping center rather than something designed to leverage federal tax credits.
Right.
And I think the issue with TIF policy is, especially if you're looking at a redevelopment deal that's going to help you solve some other strategic challenges for the city. Income mixing, healthier neighborhoods, right? You might be able to convince council that that's worth a higher TIF participation than if it was just a greenfield sort of deal. I'd always be hard pressed with any number in a TIF policy that locks you into a particular cap. You know, as a guideline, I think that's fine, but some deals really do need a little more TIF participation. So we can talk more offline because it's all pay-go TIF, and I can show you those numbers, but
Well, I think it would be probably helpful to continue this discussion as we get closer to talking about TIF for Fitchburg and the programming that we're going to create around the new TIF funds, the new affordable housing fund. So,
And I think having that discussion that Kurt,
Thank you, Kurt. I thought it was a very good presentation. Very good presentation.
thank you.
do Mike, are you raising your hand?
yes, yeah. I just was going to suggest that as future conversations of this committee continue, the idea of maybe looking at TIF for housing separate from other industrial and mixed-use economic development, we kind of have adopted or just evolved to a one-size-fits-all policy, and I think your explanation there, Kurt, of distinguishing with housing, and I like that kind of looking at the developer equity, you know, there as maybe kind of a guide or a ratio there versus just a number and percentage that we've kind of picked out because we do that with our industrial and our commercial and mixed-use TIFs.
Hey, Mike, just so you know, it's a little difficult to hear you.
It was.
Usually I'm too loud.
Yeah, not this time.
Okay.
Are you speaking directly into your microphone?
No, I'm supposed to be speaking to the laptop that's in front of me on the table here. That's where the microphone is coming from. Not this one. This is
Okay.
for the TV audience.
It breaks from time to time.
Yeah.
He's about 8 foot away from the microphone, okay?
Okay,
This is social distancing, Dorothy, you know that.
Thanks, Kurt. We really appreciate you coming to us
Sure.
virtually.
Yeah.
any other final questions for Kurt? I know we can get it, have him back at another time. He's not that far away, just a laptop away. So, any other final questions for Kurt before we go on?
Nope.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
Kurt, thank you.
thank you
so
all.
much. Yeah,
Thanks,
great to
Kurt.
see
Hey,
you.
thanks so
Kurt.
much.
Okay,
Much appreciated.
Okay.
thanks. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Kurt.
So the next item on our agenda is the process for reviewing action items. I guess we have the 2019 action items. Did everyone get that? Did everyone take a look at that?
Yeah.
The plan action items that Joyce sent out 2019, 2020, 21, 22. I thought it might make sense just to look at the 2019 action items and see where we are with those before we talk about process, because I think we need to develop a process of how we're going to move through these. But I thought we'd just get an update first. If Mike or Joyce, you wouldn't mind, maybe we start with the from the bottom up. In terms of, under 2019. So where are we at with amending the comprehensive plan?
You want to go ahead?
The comprehensive plan has been approved, and they're in the process of posting that online right now. So the 10-year major comprehensive plan update is completed.
And it includes the affordable housing plan.
Yes, that's one of the documents that it references, yes.
Great. Okay, so if we go on to the next item, Establish guidelines for council members in development process.
That has not been done.
Okay. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That was a recommendation that came from our consultant to look to engage the alders for the respective districts in the various development projects there. And I think it kind of came about through some of what we experienced, and Dorothy can maybe articulate this, with the J.T. Klein project, specifically on South Fish Hatchery Road, to maybe have the alders engaged more in projects that are coming forward in their respective districts.
Right.
There, so I think it's really something that we'd probably turn to Dorothy to maybe bring up as a conversation item at a council meeting, to kind of ask, how do our alders want to be engaged in that process? In Madison, it sounds like it's a more formalized process there, and I'm not sure if our council wants to adopt a real formal policy, or if it's more of an informal process there. We usually, whenever a development proposal comes forward, and even in the case of J.T. Klein, we always direct anybody that's working on a development proposal to reach out to the two alders for the respective districts. So that's already happening informally. That's one of the first things that we suggest that they do.
But it might be helpful if Dorothy brought this to the council again to see if there's some further discussion and possibly wanting to formalize this.
Yeah, especially
Sure.
with, we've got multiple new council members who weren't on the council when the housing plan was adopted. So I think it probably is something that, you know, maybe should be a conversation item with the entire council.
Okay.
And I guess I would just add that I heard Kurt say that you have to get the group on and be an advocate for the project. So I think that's really an important thing. That's one of the things I think we're lacking, is somebody to be an advocate for the developer and help answer questions and triage, because I know with some of the Jacob Klein concerns, Mike and I kind of got caught in the middle, and it was difficult to get people to kind of understand from a staff level.
Yep.
If that makes sense, because we're not a policymaker, and so
Right.
I think for people to come to us to try and, then they think we're pushing for the developer, when it's like, if it's in the plan and it's something that's should be approved, then we have to say it should be approved, because that's what our directions are. That's what the policy says. So I think we would like to see our elected officials more the cheerleader, I think, for some of this stuff.
One of the problems that we've had in the past number of years is that we've had council members that took resident side in opposing things.
Yep.
And that's made it really, really difficult on staff and developers. We need alders that are going to be a bridge between staff and developers and residents, not just jump on board with the residents and say, we don't want that development because the residents don't want that development. That's the wrong way for an alder to act. I think that the new group of alders are going to be a lot easier to work with.
I hope so.
So maybe bringing forward some examples from other communities, Dorothy, that talk about how developers are supposed to engage, local alders, or not maybe, a specific number, but you could certainly look to the city of Madison, or, and I'd be happy to talk with you offline about this, coming up with just some examples that, for guidelines, for developers and council members to be communicating before, in the beginning, so they're involved from the beginning. Yeah. Okay, great. Create materials promoting existing housing programs. Where are you guys on with that?
Well, we don't really have existing housing programs here at the local level. So it's really more of the Dane County CDBG and home fund programs and the Affordable Housing Fund through Dane County. And that's when we get requests from various developers that we usually will send them links to those materials and help put them in contact with the appropriate staff people for those programs.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, Mike, if I was a developer and I was passing through and I stopped at a place called Fitchburg, where do I have information that might lure me to want to develop a property in Fitchburg? Do we have any, I hate to use the wrong word, but I think it's the right word too. Do we have any Fitchburg propaganda information that's given out to potential developers?
Yes, in fact, we have a whole marketing folder that's not only in hard copy, but we have it all available electronically, and it conveniently fits on a little USB card that says Fitchburg. We got that idea from our friends at Promega Corporation, and we can send you guys the link to that or the packet to that. Yeah, just
I have
because.
that. That's the only thing you give? Anyway, but that's good. I mean, if you have something, Mike, that's good, because I think we need to get aggressive.
Yeah.
And the way to get aggressive is that once all of this annexation takes place, there'll be a lot of land, a lot of places that we feel people might decide to invest because, we are a bridge between, say, Madison and, say, Oregon and places like those. I want us to take advantage of what we've got working for us.
And included in that packet are folders for the various developments, the neighborhood developments that are out there that shows the land uses. It has our land use map, it has our comprehensive plan, it's got all the marketing materials from our Fitchburg Chamber of Commerce. And so we can send you examples of what's included in there.
Okay.
This went to all the residents, right?
Yes.
So that goes all, we have that. It's in if you come to my house, there are things right on the table out there.
Yeah.
So you can read about Fitchburg. But I'm looking for something that will give somebody an incentive to say, hey, this is where I should be invested.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mike is saying that they have complete packets designed for that very thing.
Okay, that's good. We're on the right track.
But I like just keeping this handy to show people also.
I guess I would comment too that we have, the planning department has a lot of information, including a development plan, or guide, I should say, out on their site. And we have our economic development site broke down into 4 different categories. We have an existing business site, we have a entrepreneur site, we have a site selector site, and then we have one whole portal that has any kind of material that you're looking for, funding, sites, you name it. So
Do we
there's,
have those
our website is.
on the
and-
Fitchburg website right now, that I can go up and just click on it?
On the city site?
Just.
I'm sorry, I
the
didn't
city-
hear what you said.
Do we have all that information there that I can just go to the city?
Yeah,
of Fitchburg
I can
and-
send,
Okay,
so the Economic Development Department, we have a mini website within a website. So we paid for what they call a
It's a header
package. So we have just, I can send you a link to it, you can kind of look through there and see what's all in there. Because we're always looking for criticism and critiques, so.
You probably will get one from me, you know that.
That's okay.
That's good, we like
I
that,
would-
that's okay.
Go ahead. I just took a look on the website and I didn't see anything that said housing development.
Thank you very much.
I just looked around and wasn't sure where to go. Like if I was a developer and I wanted to do multifamily or I just didn't see there was so it'd be great. I hate to give you guys any work, but it'd be great to see something that just had a link to housing somewhere that was like, on all the clicks that I went to, not a single click said housing.
We
So.
can beef it up.
More robust, though.
And I also think that the county can do something for you, which would be maybe an FAQ that had, and I have all the language, but that had CDBG, RLF, I mean, the Affordable Housing Development Fund, Dane County Housing Initiative, our website link, that you could just, send somebody instead of having to send all these different links. So you could send that or include that as a resource. But I also have some fact sheets for, financing for affordable housing from past, housing summits. So I could send that to you too, but it didn't feel like I could get there that quickly, but I don't want to make any work for you, so.
Just out of curiosity, Joyce, is there a problem just having links from all of this economic development into the one Fitchburg site so that once you're on the Fitchburg site, you can click and go to the next one rather than start the process all over again? I mean, why aren't we having all of them linked into one central Fitchburg website?
So they somewhat are. When you,
Okay.
and I'll show you how to navigate to get to what we have. So right on our homepage, there's 4 little headers in the upper right-hand corner. It's economic development, it's public safety, library, and I think recreation. So there's 4 of us that have kind of the mini websites within the city site.
City website, okay.
And when Mike and I do like something for, to try and get people to navigate to our site, we just give them a link that'll link them right directly to economic development. So we were at the Entrepreneurs Conference last week, and we had an exhibit booth there, and everything was linked right to our economic development page. So it bypasses the homepage and it goes right to our homepage for economic development.
But I think now the time has come to have a more robust housing section on our page. Now that we've got the affordable housing plan, now that we've got the advisory committee, previously we never had those things in place. And moving forward, when we finally get some resources, hopefully when TID 4 and TID 6 are kept open to capitalize a more robust housing fund in 2022, I think the time is right to start to beef up our housing presence on our economic development website, to have that kind of one-stop shop that people can go for resources there. So we'll take a look at that and work with our IT department on kind of setting up the structure for that as far as like the categories, so then we can populate those areas with the necessary information.
And I wonder, because like so many other municipalities, there's this, housing has a economic development piece. It also has a planning and zoning piece. It has a, it has so many different things that bring it together that I don't know where the best place for it to be other than being visible is, but it combines so many different departments that it would be great to have a one-stop shop for any developer that links them all. The next one on under 2019, authorized Dane County Housing Authority. Great news. That passed.
And it passed unanimously too.
It passed unanimously?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I think that sends it was a positive message just having it passed, but to have it passed unanimously, I think sends a very positive, even more positive message going forward.
Were there any changes between what we recommended and what they did?
No, they took the recommendations from this committee as far as the language with the amendment that was included in there.
Great.
Yep. And
That's
we've
great.
made, Olivia, we've
So-
made contact with the new executive director of the Dane County Housing Authority, Karen Kanak. So we're in contact with her already in communication.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, at some point, it might be nice to have her pop on and introduce herself at one of our meetings here.
Yeah.
She did that at the Dane County Housing Initiative steering committee last time, but because a lot of people don't know who she is, and yeah. enable ADUs, where are we at with that?
Accessory dwelling units are allowed right now in our smart code neighborhoods and the form-based neighborhoods. But right now, I don't think we currently have them within our Euclidean zoning neighborhoods. And I think that, again, is maybe a conversation that we want to have with our planning department to see if that's something that we want to take a look at within the traditional Euclidean zoning code. But they are allowed in our smart code form-based, which are the two neighborhoods on the east side of Fitchburg, in uptown Fitchburg, and also in the Terra Vesa neighborhood.
That was one of the things that was on my question list for the comp plan update, because I was having planning staff tell me I have to wait for the update to the comp plan to add Euclidean, or to add ADUs. And then we got to the comp plan update process, and they were telling me that that's not part of it. And I'm like, well, when do we talk about it? And how do we talk about it? So I want to talk about it. I want to get it in, but I'm kind of being told different things by different planning people.
Okay.
And I've been real frustrated with a lot of different questions that I have like that.
So we've had a kind of a conversation, Olivia, Mike, and I, about the role of this committee. And the role of this committee is you are our experts, and we're gonna take what you ask of us in a memo form back to CETA and back to the council as a report. So if it's something that it's a policy decision, I guess we would hope that the council would take that forward and not, we can't tell other departments what they need to do and what they don't need to do. But we can say, based on the consensus of what we heard from our experts, these are some of the things that are action items in our plan that haven't been looked at.
Do we still have the group? Scott?
So then, in that case, should we put together a memo, considering these are is a 2019 action item?
Yep.
Identifying the action items, or in particular ADUs, but the action items that we would like to request moving forward to CETA and/or the city council.
Yep, I guess what I was anticipating is just making a memo. So I have two things to go on there. One would be the guidelines for council members, and then the ADUs so far of what we've gone through.
Right.
And Olivia, one thing to just remember, these are identified as 2019, but it took us longer to get the plan approved when it was drafted. So we got a late start here. So the plan didn't get approved until almost the end of 2019. And then we were able to create the committee first thing in 2020. It kind of got, because we have elections here fairly frequently, sometimes, it gets caught up in the timing of those elections, so we got a little delayed. But now we're ready to hit the ground running here.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to overwhelm you, because I know you're both have big burdens of work, and and you do a tremendous amount. But Dorothea just mentioned being frustrated, and so yeah, and the memo, like we talked about, would probably be a good way to move the conversation forward.
Yep.
And CETA has done that before, and that has resulted in various conversations at the council about whether they wanted to proceed with looking at a policy or a process, or whether they declined to at that particular time. But we've used that method before.
Okay. So then we would bring a memo to the next meeting so we could all vote on it, or do you just, what's the process here?
Well, we don't have enough meetings. I'd like them to just write a memo.
Yeah, we'll just do a basic thing. These are the things we discussed. And then it'll be up to Julia, Joe, and Dorothy, because Julia and Joe are on CETA. and Dorothy's on this committee, so it'll be up to those three to work together on presenting this information and then following up.
Okay, and then just share with us in our next meeting packet the memo that was,
Yep.
But Olivia, usually what we've done when we've written a memo like that, we usually will work with whoever is the chair. So we
Okay,
would
fine.
draft the memo in consultation with you based on what you've heard from the committee, and
Okay.
then submit it.
okay. And then if I have any questions, Dorothy, I can reach out to you, make sure it's, something that, yeah. okay.
Yep, just like I did with the minutes.
Great, excellent. Okay, review park fees and dedication requirements.
That's something that was identified in the plan, because when you look at the fee structure for the city of Fitchburg, and I think we were at $8,000 or $9,000 in total fees across the board. It was really in the parks area and the dedication where we probably were, compared to our peer communities here in the region, where we were higher than the peer communities.
Right,
I think that again is we're looking for some policy direction from the elected officials if they want to take a look at that or not. So I think that should be included in the memo for discussion.
Yep, that's good. That makes sense.
okay,
I think one thing on on that whole parks dedication, park improvements there, it seems like in looking at that analysis, we were high on the park dedication, the amount of land, but in some cases, we seem to struggle from a budget standpoint on the park improvements, and especially with the ongoing maintenance of those park improvements, and where do those dollars come from?
Yes, and impact fees can't address
Exactly,
maintenance. It's
yeah.
just the construction of the park, and I think what gets confused is an impact fee for a park can only be used in the park that the impact fee is collected for in that area. So if you collect a impact fee for a development on the west side, for a park on the west side, that money can't get used on the east side in a park over there. It's gotta be used for the area that the park was, and I think that's the other thing that
Yeah.
sometimes gets a little bit muddied inside the Parks Department is they wanna take money from here to there to improve a different park than what the fee was collected for.
And
And-
it's a lot more restrictive than that even. It can only be used for park that is immediately impacting that development or a community park, which is the golf course, McKee Farms Park and McGaw Park.
Right.
So any of the parks in the older neighborhoods are not allowed to use money other than levy money for any kind of improvements that they want. That's, makes it difficult.
So
So I'm trying to get, Dunn's Marsh area turned into a community park for the west side so we can do improvements there for the, bike paths using park dedication fees. Otherwise, it would have to come from levy money, and that's like $250,000 or something.
is there an ideal way to apply dedication fees?
I guess
Lifting restrictions to a specific park or a region or
It's
a
impact
community?
fees are
State law,
It's driven-
Pardon me?
based on state law.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Really?
Finance will tell us that we cannot do what we want to do because state law says we must do it their way,
That's
period.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Have you,
essentially, with the reason the law is created the way it is so that new development doesn't have to pay for old parks. It's based on the use that that park will have in the neighborhood and the neighbors that are gonna be using that park. It's the development cost to put in the play structure, the building, if there is one, the amenities of that park. And, it's for that purpose. It's not to go back and improve older parks. It'd be up to the elected officials if they want to create some kind of fund other than, converting every park into a community park. The elected officials would probably have to go in and create a park improvement impact fee, just like when they go through and replace sidewalks or street trees. They'd have to charge every municipality evenly, or even every property owner evenly within a area charge in order to improve a park in an older area. You know, so just like you charge to repair a city sidewalk section or pay to replace a tree, every lot owner would have to pay to improve the park in their community. It has to be equal and fair amongst all the property owners. It can't be selective.
Well, the double problem that we're coming up with is we either have many teeny tiny little parks that the city has to pay ongoing maintenance for, or we have a big pot of money that we can't use.
Have you talked to, go ahead, Godwin.
I was about to say, Dorothy, one of the reasons I think some of us volunteered for this committee is that we know what we've done in the past, and it hasn't brought us anything to any good result. Why don't you bring that to the attention of the committee that you're on? And listen, maybe this is a time to review a lot of the things that we've done historically. If we do what we've always done, we will get the result that we've always gotten. So the intent here is for us to begin to be proactive. How does Fitchburg become a go-to place? That's in the back of our minds. And, put that on the table. Let them come up and say, okay, street law, etc. But the point here is that, for God's sake, it has not worked all this time. So why hold on to it?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, we're talking state laws.
Well, have you talked to your council about this?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not talking your city council, I'm talking your
Committee,
legal counsel about, you know, I mean, maybe the city creates a trust, or maybe, I really don't know. I don't know, but, that somehow, or like,
Olivia, there's always a backdoor approach. There's always plan B. So my point, put on the table and see what is a plan B.
Let's explore some other opportunities.
Option.
Renaming, restructuring, the names of the parks, the type of the parks, city, I don't know, like you said, community parks. But yeah, we should definitely explore this because this is an obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Well, Fitchburg can be pretty anal about making sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And that's one of the things that they've been real strong on over time.
Well, welcome to the new Fitchburg. Many of us are progressive in that regard.
So I think this is one of those things that this committee has pretty much little involvement other than to say, I think it's a bigger picture item that's going to involve a lot of committees and the council for sure, because they have to be the ones that are behind this to lead the way. So I'm just going to add that to our list and we can move on.
Please, thank you. That's it.
Okay, so the number one thing is create a housing committee. Good job, you guys.
Well, we think we've got a stellar group
We're here.
with a lot of good expertise, so we appreciate your willingness to serve.
Well, we appreciate your expertise and support and guidance.
And we need the strength of voices to help make things happen. And that's huge.
So, process. So in terms of process, I kind of feel like at some point we need to review, right? So this memo is a great example, right, of what we can do and how we can communicate with the CETA and the council. But what are the other ways, and how are the, how do we, how do we bring forward? I mean, certainly we have this affordable housing fund on the horizon, which is a really big thing and an important thing for the community.
I think, Olivia, I think our biggest goal right now is to really start spending this next year and a half or 2 years on really researching and putting in place the best way to utilize the funding. And it's going to have to be in a way that it promotes not only multifamily housing rehab, but we also have to look at ways for home ownership. Single-family home ownership, townhouse, condos, whatever. And come up with some really good programs that are unique and maybe cutting edge even. And so what Mike and I have been doing is kind of looking at a lot of our peer communities and seeing what kind of programs they currently have in place, how they're working, what's good, what's not, and bringing that information forward to you. And
Okay.
Marshall, you might be able to help us with your background in working with affordable housing, with coming up with some kind of creative ideas of different programs that we could put together. You know, even for senior housing as well. And
Yeah,
so
I'll do my best.
I think one of the things we were talking about, Olivia, is how do we prioritize do we want to split up into groups and say, well, maybe we're going to kind of look at the single family ownership and what's out there? Or do you want me to keep looking for things and presenting them to you and we talk about them? Or I guess that's what we're not sure how to kind of move into this next phase. Because this is really going to be the most important, is how we utilize those funds in a way that,
I think the what you suggested is the best move to take. Don't forget, this committee is relatively new. We're trying to find our what you call steps, so to speak. So anything you can do to keep us, informed, so that we'll be able to help make the decisions that we think we need to do in the future, is the approach I like to see us take. Let's not do anything, because we've got 4 meetings a year, so we've got 2 more meetings coming up. But let's use that as the time to build the foundation. We can't build a house right now. Let's try to build a foundation. So whatever information you've garnered and you think it might be helpful to us, why don't we use this year, and this is a very interesting year, to try to at least set the foundation. Hopefully, as we go forward, we can then decide whether we want to, have subcommittees per se. But for now, I think the right approach is let's begin to at least consolidate who we are. Let's build a foundation.
Thank you,
go
God.
ahead.
Dorothy?
One of the things that I'd like to do, and I don't know if we have writers in the crowd or people that know people that are experts that want to write articles, letters to the editor, to the Fitchburg Star, to do community education and kind of start getting the community behind some of the things that we want to do, or at least help them to learn the basics of what it is we want them to know, so they can end up supporting us.
Mike, go ahead.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to say the starting point to get to where Godwin and Joyce are talking about, and something that if this committee is so inclined, is that the source of capitalizing our affordable housing fund really comes from keeping open 2 of our really large TID districts that are projected to close in 2022. And that would be TID number 4, which is here at the Fitchburg Center campus, and then TID number 6, which is over on the west side of the city, over by Orchard Point. But the reason I bring that up is we want to plan for that and look at the programs in anticipation of, if we keep both of those open, that will capitalize to about $6 to $7 million of resources that it gives us. But I think some assistance we need from this committee is making a recommendation to the council, because the council has to take action that year of 2022 to pass a resolution to agree to keep that open that year to capitalize the Affordable Housing Fund. So we just can't take for granted that
we're gonna
that
get
is
the
an
money.
automatic by our city council. I think it's a recommendation that we need to bring forward and kind of, again, we have elections here now every year with even and odd councils, so the faces can change before 2022. So I think emphasizing that as a priority, if this committee determines that that's a priority, should be a recommendation that is brought forth and that is kind of renewed each year as a recommendation.
That's a year from December. This December, this committee needs to have a recommendation to the council going into 2022.
Yeah.
A year from this December. Okay, just a timeline. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think one of the things that I always circle back to, and Godwin kind of started on this, we need to have a good foundation to start from. Yeah, I see that we're gonna have some potential money coming in with this, but to get the most bang for our buck with this money, if there's,
Hold on. Time out.
Your microphone.
Can everyone turn their mics off? I'm here, we're getting some feedback and I can't hear. Sorry, go ahead.
so what I was saying is that I know that there's this potential pot of money out there, but it isn't there. The city alders have not approved anything yet. So we can work on a plan to spend money that we don't have, that might come, or we can work on addressing the cost structure of why our housing stock costs so much to begin with, which is impact fees, street designs, water retention ponds, the time frame that it costs to do the development up front, dragging on from, you know, a 90-day approval to being a year and a half, 2 years. Those are the big dollar items that raise the cost of funding, and those are things that we can address right now. To come up with a program, and we can work on a program as well for how to spend this money that we may get if the TIF stays open. But I think we need to look at also the cost structure of why our housing costs so much to begin with and address that. And whether this group is something that wants to take on that. I mean, impact fees, to kind of put it in perspective, Fitchburg's parkland dedication fee is $4,500. That is almost 4 times higher than our next local municipality. 4 times. The city of Madison is like $950, I think. Sun Prairie was $1,024. So we are 4 times just in the parkland dedication cost, let alone the park improvement fee and other impact fees that go into development. And so I look at it as, you know, I don't want to seem like it's the development community is always asking for help, but if you want to start looking at the root cost of why housing costs more, especially in this community, we need to look at the fee structure and the approval process and try to simplify that and get it so that it's more of a predictable process for those people that want to come and use these programs that we're going to try to create. Because without a planned process and a predictable time frame, developers are still going to go, well, yeah, you might have the programs, but if it's going to cost me 2 years of interest to hold on to a $2 million piece of property, that's an extra $40,000 that's going into this that I got to charge the eventual buyers of the property. I mean, we got to look at our process and our costs first. Not saying that we don't need to do the Affordable Housing Fund and how we're going to spend that and what the criteria are, but we also need to look at the other side of it.
Yeah.
Right, and I agree, I totally agree. Now, does that mean that, I think we can, walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can do both things.
Yeah.
But does that mean that we should maybe have a subcommittee that meets between our 3 monthly, or, our every 3rd month? And I don't know, staff, I don't know how we would do that, but it seems that, or we just have both of these things on every single agenda going forward. I think that, coming up with a list of how people have used their TIF funding, right? Whether it's down payment, rehab, maybe it's targeted to opportunity zones. I think coming up with different ideas and examples will not be too difficult. And we're happy to help. But what do you think is the best way to go forward, Mike and Joyce, in terms of your time and our time? Because I think we do need to do both of these things. I don't think we can, do one and not the other.
I would offer.
For one thing, I recall at our first meeting, one of the first things that I brought to the attention of our group was the document that Joyce sent to me. After reading it and comparing how much it costs for construction in Fitchburg compared to other neighboring cities. We were just completely out of line. Now, from my perspective, the recommendation made out here makes a lot of sense, because I would think that the Common Council wants to know what this committee is doing. I think I will almost say maybe we should start by sending, I don't know how you send that information. Maybe Dorothy is our go-to person, but we need to talk about the fact that this committee has started, and the very first thing we've noticed is that we are completely out of sync with the rest of the communities with respect to how much it costs to put a project in Fitchburg. Maybe that should be one of the letters or something that we send either to the mayor or through Dorothy to this committee. But that to me is an actionable item that doesn't really require a lot of research, because the information is right before our eyes. That was if you take a look at the minutes that were submitted, that was the very first thing I talked about. That, my God, it was expensive, but including Madison. That to me is unacceptable.
Right.
Did you want to say
I was
something?
going to suggest that there maybe be 2 tracks there and maybe 2 subcommittees. We got enough members here that we could have 2 subcommittees, and one could look at what I would call more the regulatory side and the city approval development process, and then the other side would look at kind of best practices for, let's say, financial programs and how we might utilize those dollars in the future, both on what I would call more the supply side, where maybe you look at a land bank kind of model, and I'm just putting ideas out there. It would be up to the committee to determine, but maybe there would also be something on the demand side, as far as, would we target some kind of down payment assistance for first-time home buyers with some kind of recapture provision, and things like that. So I think we've got enough members here and enough expertise in the group that if we could have, a small subcommittee that would start to look at each of those areas, I think that would be helpful to utilize the time between our quarterly meetings to start that conversation. What do I want to say here? I understand that our fee structure is high, okay, compared to maybe our peer communities there. But I just want to also be realistic that even if we eliminated, and I'm talking now just the fees, I'm not talking the approval process and the holding cost, because I think we've got a poster child over on the east side of what not to do. Terra Vesta took us 10 years to get through the entitlement process there, and lessons learned, if we're talking seriously about the cost of housing, that's not a model to replicate going forward there. But even on just the fee structure and the impact fees at $9,000, if we eliminated that altogether and took it down to 0, we don't move the needle much on housing affordability. I think it's a mix of things. There's a whole host of things that we as the city of Fitchburg do not control, and that's the cost of building materials, the cost of labor, financial kind of market considerations and everything out there. So I know it's something we should have a conversation about if the council gives us the green light on that, but I just also want to be realistic about just that particular item there, how much of an impact we can or can't make there.
Yeah, and just to put in perspective, it doesn't sound like much, and Mike says it might not move the needle much, but NAHB, the National Association of Home Builders, did a study 2 years ago that, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but for every $1,000 the cost of a home goes up, there are 350 families that no longer can afford that home. So when you spreading that it's, $6,000, $8,000, $9,000, that's 2,500 families that may no longer be able to afford a house. So while it doesn't seem like much on a needle scale dollar-wise, it does on who can afford the house. And that's what we're talking about as the housing committee, is who can afford that house.
Right, and Brian, I agree with you, and I do think that, we all know there's no silver bullet, and the supply chain and the obstacles to building affordable housing are numerous, whether it's the lack of labor or land or zoning or financing or, development fees or impact fees or parkland fees. So I think that it's important, and, right, so I think it's important not to, I think we need to look at all of them, and I think it's helpful to consider all of them. And like Brian was saying, $4,500 means a lot, and it also to me says, if we're looking at those as a city, that we're really taking, we're really listening to the developers, and the developers have been saying for a long time, this is not right. This is out of sync with the rest of the communities. And I know that we're just the housing community, and we are not parks. And, but I do think it's within our purview to look at the obstacles to housing affordability and make recommendations that are actually, have been brought to our attention by the people who are actually helping facilitate the development of housing. So I feel like I do think that's important. I don't think it's the answer.
Yeah, I use the examples like they had in Middleton, where they had the alley-fed garages. They have them selling for between $350,000 and $400,000. While those aren't maybe what we would deem workforce housing, if you take a $4,500 reduction in the impact fee, that's 1.2 or 1.3% of the overall cost of that house. Now, take that towards financing it for 30 years or towards somebody's down payment money. You've made a big difference with $4,500 that maybe you can't even give them a housing grant from this affordable housing trust fund later on. That's $4,500, but you've reduced that cost up front. That allows more people to get in there. It builds their equity faster. I mean, it's a multiplier effect too. So.
Well, and I also think we didn't. There are many things in Kurt's presentation we didn't talk about, and one of them was these new 1,200 square foot houses that they're trying on
Chapel View.
Chapel Street, Chapel. Chapel. And $4,500 to a 1,200 square foot house, is.
That's what I'm talking about.
A big difference.
They're $350,000 is what they're for sale for right now. There's 1,200 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage. That's $352,000, and I think there's 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-car garage. That's about 2,000 square feet because it's 3 bedrooms, and those are I think closer to 400 or 410. And if you were to take an impact fee reduction of half, $4,500, that's still between 1% and 1.2% of that type of project. Now, I don't know what they paid for land in that project, but it all helps, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
It all adds up. Yep, I agree. So how do we do that then? How do we actually form subcommittees to have these conversations?
So I think first, maybe we should find out what kind of reaction we get from the council. And then we can come up with a strategy on, because what I'm envisioning, and maybe this is not the best approach, but I think it would be, is to kind of take our story on the go. And when the Parks Commission, if they choose to take up the impact fee, we have Brian go, and we have Brian go, and we have Dorothy go, and just lay out the facts and say, this is why we would like you to look at it. And I think each one of us has that expertise to share. Arshel, you've done a lot of this. I mean, you might be able to, I see we utilizing you a lot for the education aspect. And I heard Kurt say that that's really important, is education, and I think that's something that the more that we can talk about this and inform people as to why it's important, I think the more you're gonna get buy-in. I don't know if you think that's a good approach, Mike, but I think before we get too far, we need to get the reaction from the council and what they feel is important, and maybe we have to go to the council at some point and talk about, maybe we have a work session with the plan commission, because there's a lot of things on here that, we'd like to see them do. Maybe we work with other committees on, maybe we go to the Parks Commission and talk about this. I mean, and educate them.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my, and I talk too much, so I'll shut up.
No.
Because it's
Well,
past
Joyce,
7 o'clock.
Yeah.
I think you were just right on what we need to be doing. We need to sell what we're trying to do. Once they're buyers, then it makes it easy.
Well,
So
yeah, well,
let's start.
So
Yeah.
we start with the memo that includes,
Yeah.
you know, these top things that are action items from the plan that they passed, and then continue to communicate. And you know, we'll see over the next however many months. But there may be a need to actually write another memo, or like you said, reach out to the Parks Department and have a joint meeting with the Parks Department, or right.
Or to make a presentation at
Right.
one of their meetings. I mean, say, look, we know what you've been doing, et cetera, but here's a little problem we have with X, Y, Z that's part of what you do. Help
Right.
us out.
and we're
Right,
advisory
right.
to CETA, so this committee is advisory to CETA, and one of the mountains that you have to climb a lot of times is that folks don't understand that housing is hand in hand with, you know, workforce housing is hand in hand with having a good economy.
Right.
And being able to house workers of all kinds. So it's important CETA understands too that housing isn't just something that hopefully happens.
Two other things just to keep in mind. I think when we talk about ownership, it's not just single-family ownership. It could be multifamily ownership.
Right.
You know, prior to the recession, it was the multifamily ownership that allowed people to get in to that entry point there. And we've been missing that since the recession there. We really haven't had any new product. We're finally going to get some now in the Stoner Prairie neighborhood on the west side, and we're going to get some on the east side that Encore Construction is doing with the Paxton Place townhomes over there. So I think that's another thing to look at, and that goes back to Kurt's point of the missing middle there and just that housing type product. And then the other thing I'd like to ask for this committee's help on is, and Kurt referenced that Middleton has done this, when the new WIDA scoring criteria comes out, and we can check in with them and find out when that's going to be released. I think one thing that would be really helpful and that our community struggles with right now is where does Fitchburg as a community want to see and is willing to support affordable housing developments in our community? Because I can tell you as a staff, we struggle with that, with developers that will approach us about different areas. And we just know that it's not going to receive support. So I think if we can align and kind of prioritize based on the WIDA scoring criteria, where is there land available for either infill development or redevelopment to align with their scoring criteria, and then we can communicate that out to the development community, or if people are calling us and asking where are there places available for affordable housing, we can direct them to those particular locations and parcels, because that's something we need to do better at, and hopefully that makes it a more positive process for everybody and results in more affordable housing in Fitchburg.
Yeah, and I think that with my WIDA hat on, former WIDA hat on, I would say
Yes.
it was very helpful when we reviewed applications or we went through these awards every year when Wayman and I were signing off on awards. If the support on the application end was pretty uniform, and because WIDA is not there to resolve local disputes and fights. And I'd have people trying to pull me into, well, you know, everything from Tree Lane to every shootout out there, and that's just not what WIDA's there to do, or the Division of Housing or whatever.
Right.
So the more you can have your act together, it, for a lot of reasons, it helps, so.
Well, I will tell you that because of the Dane County Housing Initiative, I hear that from communities all over Dane County, and
Yeah.
it's a slow road to hoe, but it's communication. It's a presence on your website. It's actually a brochure. It wouldn't hurt to put together a brochure, housing in Fitchburg, that talks about all the different kinds of housing and, you know, with some demographics. Maybe
Right.
take some data out of your housing plan. I mean, you've got such a great housing plan. You might want to just make that available. And distributed at community meetings or neighborhood association meetings, just to get the word out. But I will tell you that we are working, we're sort of in the pre-development stages of this regional housing strategy. And we're going to be doing extensive outreach to communities to get neighborhood associations and neighborhoods and nonprofits and residents involved in the regional housing strategy for Dane County. And of course, that's a little ways off, but I just want to let you know that, because we are going to be reaching out to Fitchburg and all of the communities around Dane County, because education has really been the bedrock of understanding this work and making it realized. Godwin, did you want to?
I'm so happy that we have the right person sitting next to Mike Zimmerman, my good old friend Brian Shipp. And I think Mike,
I was looking at McKee, I thought you were
right
talking
now,
about
so he
McKee.
knows what we're supposed to be doing. We will be leapfrogging all other entities. Thank you, Brian, for taking care of
Oh my
this.
gosh.
You're going to deliver for us.
I've known Brian
Thanks,
for how
Godwin.
long? I trust him.
Dorothy,
That's
did
your
you have
first
anything you wanted to say?
mistake.
There's your first problem. Poor guy. That's why I like the guy. That's why I like Godwin.
One of the community programs that I would love to promote and get established is a program to work with people that tend to be denied mortgages and get them accepted. Working with banks and whatever to get the education that they need to be able to become homeowners in the first place. There's a lot of people that do not qualify for owning a home simply because they will not be given a mortgage. And I would like to be part of bringing them up to speed and helping them to get into a position to be able to get a mortgage and buy a house. It's not going to help to have houses available if we have people that can't get mortgages.
As a former banker, I tell you, this is easy to do. Almost all the banks around here have a CRA requirement. And one of the things they've always wanted to do was to show that they provided loans to people in the community. In fact, when I was with M&I, we had, with other banks, a round table that showed people how to do this. So, Dorothy, if you want to, I will even volunteer with you as a former banker. So let's talk to other banks and let's have a community. Here, we've got a beautiful library. We've got a good community center where you can have, one of those round tables for people who are looking for housing. For most, whether you like it or not, it's the ultimate asset that anybody wants out here, because there you feel, hey, this is where I belong. I'll volunteer with you. Let's take a look at the banking community and see if Fitchburg wants to do this. How can you teach our people what to do, because they will then become reliable customers of yours in the future. So
And
it's something to do. We're gonna do that.
It's a lot more than helping them to get a mortgage, because what my base question to people to see if they're ready to own a home is, who do you call when the furnace stops working? If they say, I call the guy I send the check to every month, wrong answer. Owning a home is entirely different than being a renter. And there's a big transition that people need to learn to be able to make that.
Like I said, that training is available. I know that because I started small business banking at M&I. That's one of the things we did. We coordinated with other banks and had regular roundtable sessions. I'll leave it up there.
I would love to challenge Fitchburg banks more than I think they're realistically challenged to put together programs like that.
Go for it.
And we've got a subcommittee of 2 going here.
Okay, so you guys, it's 7:22, and we've been at this for a couple hours. Marshall, we didn't actually hear from you most of the meeting, so just want to make sure.
You're still muted, Marshall.
You're muted.
No.
You're on mute. Oh, there.
Oh,
There we
no,
go.
Oh,
I'm zooming on my iPad, so
Oh.
Okay.
I've had a bit of an issue. Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. I mean, we do need to look at the impact fees and permit fees. I think we can identify some areas that are going to be compatible with the new scoring criteria, which is always important because it's almost impossible to do affordable housing with LIHTC funds. And also, I think that, you know, rehab is challenging to rehab those older apartment buildings, but you get more bang for your buck, let's put it that way, than building new. I don't know what else I want to say, except that I'm happy to talk to you offline about subcommittees you would like to put together. I'm happy to be on any that I have a skill set for. The one that it was just popping in my head, and now it's just kind of gone. But yeah, good, all good things. So I'm done.
thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're a report from department. Oh boy. Hey guys, I almost forgot about you.
Oh, I think we reported all along.
Okay. Glad to hear this. Okay, well, I think we should adjourn for the evening. Thank you so much for everybody. Huge, great effort today, and really appreciate it. And Joyce and Mike, really appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And thanks for putting together that memo. I don't think we need to, we're gonna meet on Monday, September 14th. Yeah, and if there's any other things, please reach out to me in the meanwhile to continue the conversation or to discuss the memo.
Olivia, I
Yeah.
need a motion to adjourn.
Yes,
Second.
yes, motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Aye.
Okay, thanks so much. It was good to-
Thanks, everybody.
It's good to see everybody.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
Good
Yeah.
to see you. Stay cool,
Okay.
stay safe,
All
okay.
right.